But isn't that American dream? That American dream is because there's more people that live that type of fucking American reality. But isn't that American dream? That American dream is because there's more people that live that type of fucking American reality.
5 days of near nonstop death, they've now had to watch more people die. The only question tonight is this a tipping point? Or will this get lost in the fog of war? It's just another day, another unfortunate series of events that ended with death and without change. Joining me now, Mehdi Hasan. He's the founder of Zato News. It launches on Substack next month, and his book, Win Every Argument, is also out now on paperback. Mehdi, thanks for joining us tonight. It's good to see you. Look, Israel, as we just laid out in the last few hours, have tried to frame this as a tragedy, but just not one that is their fault. The IDF says it fired warning shots to try to disperse the crowd around that convoy. Do you lend any credibility to that explanation? And from the eyes of the world, does it matter what the explanation is for what we saw unfold?
Well, Abby, thanks so much for having me on the show, and thank you for that very important, very powerful intro you did just there. In terms of believing the Israelis, I would say that it took multiple innocent black people to die at the hands of police in this country, whether it's Breonna Taylor, whether it's Freddie Gray, whether it's George Floyd, for people in our industry, Abby, to start saying, well, maybe we shouldn't just blindly believe police statements after shootings happen. And I feel like we still haven't quite reached that point in the Middle East with the Israeli military. The Israeli military tend to say things that turn out not to be true, both before Gaza, when they killed Shireen Abu Akleh, a US citizen, and lied about it, or even during this conflict. So many lies the Israeli military has told about, you know, a terrorist guard list under the Rantisi hospital, a command and control center under the Al-Shifa hospital, a documentary in Lebanon that they claimed was Palestinians faking their own wounds. So many you can't even count. And now we are told today, well, actually, it was just a stampede, even though eyewitnesses, Abby, say that the Israelis opened fire, Israeli tanks opened fire without warning, according to one eyewitness in the Washington Post. Doctors say that the bodies they got at the hospital, you showed the pictures of people on donkeys, were mostly bullet wounds, not stampede wounds. The Israelis opened fire on hungry people trying to get flour. It's being called a flour massacre for that reason. And you asked, is it a tipping point? I mean, in any normal world, it should be. In any other conflict, it would be, Abby. When Putin did stuff like this in Ukraine, we condemned him. When Assad did stuff like this in Syria, we condemned him. When Israel starves hundreds of thousands of people and then shoots people who go to get flour, where's the condemnation for the United States government? The State Department spokesman would not condemn Israel today. So it's a tragedy. Is it a tipping point? I wish it was. I suspect it isn't.
What President Biden has said is that he has acknowledged the events that happened and says it will likely complicate the negotiations that they've been working on for a temporary ceasefire. From Biden's perspective, do you think this could be the incident that pushes him to actually rethink how he approaches this relationship with this particular Israeli government and this war?
As I argued in a Guardian piece recently, Joe Biden has the power to pick up the phone and end this war. He can ring the Israeli prime minister and say, we're cutting you off. We're cutting off aid. We're cutting off armaments. Israelis themselves, Israeli generals say, we can't do this war without America. He hasn't done it. He didn't do it after 10,000 dead. He didn't do it after 20,000 dead. Today we crossed 30,000 dead. You have to ask the question why. This is a man who's seen as the great comforter in chief, the great empath, has had huge personal tragedy in his own family, and yet 30,000 Palestinians, according to his own defense secretary today, 25,000 women and children. How on earth has he not stopped the war till now? How on earth are we still debating this? And Abby, on the situation on aid, I just got to point out here, 4 out of 5 of the hungriest people in the world are in Gaza right now. Even with or without those aid trucks, people are starving. A 2-month-old baby called Mahmoud Fatou starved to death earlier this week in Gaza. This is not a natural disaster. This is a man-made famine. Food is plentiful, it's available, it's a few miles away, and yet it's being blocked. In fact, at the Israeli crossing, Abby, I don't know how many CNN viewers know that people are putting up bouncy castles, Israeli protesters, and eating popcorn and candy, cotton candy, and blocking the aid. That is crazy.
Do you think, Mehdi, that there is, look, I think you understand that you say President Biden can just pick up the phone and cut it all off. You also understand he probably won't do that. So if you were to give him advice today, knowing what he is likely to be able to get to a yes on, what is the one thing that you think he should do today that would make this better, marginally better tomorrow for Gazans?
I mean, simply it is get a ceasefire, and it is within his power to get a ceasefire. It's within the power of the UN Security Council to get a ceasefire. Remember, the rest of the world wants a ceasefire. It's America that has blocked this at the UN Security Council. Even other Western nations have backed a ceasefire. It's Biden blocking it.
So if,
and you
but
say
if he's
marginally
able to
better,
get
I'm so glad.
if he's able to get that ceasefire that he's been discussing over the weekend, you would view that as progress?
Anything at this point is progress when hundreds of people are being killed every day. But I would point out, you used the right word, marginally better. A new study came out this week that said even if you get a ceasefire tomorrow, 6,500 Palestinians will die in the next 6 months from the public health conditions. And if you don't get a ceasefire tomorrow, 58,000 Palestinians will die over the next 6 months. We will be complicit in that. It's our weaponry, it's our money, it's our diplomatic support, and our president can stop this. And I hope he does.
Real quick,
but I don't think he will.
Before you go, I mean, obviously, you know, this has become a major political issue for the president. Do you think that if it does cost him the presidency, that it should, given his decisions on this war?
What I would say is that Joe Biden has rightly said for the last few years that Donald Trump poses an existential threat to our democracy. The idea that he would risk not only his own presidency, but the future of American democracy for the sake of Benjamin Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and the rest of the fascists in Israel is bizarre and inexplicable to me.
All right, Mehdi Hasan, thank you very much for...
Ceasefire now! 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 Every time media lies, a neighbor...
of cancel culture are Palestinians and people who have spoken out for Palestinian rights. I know you don't see yourself as a victim, but do you see yourself as part of that? I mean, do you think that's why you are no longer with MSNBC?
That's a great question. See, you are good at these tough interviews. You better have lots of follow-ups. Look, I left MSNBC on January 7th. I announced I was live. I was quitting. They were very good to let me negotiate a quick exit so I could go off and do my own thing now.
Yeah.
They cancelled the shows, I think, end of November it was, where they announced they were cancelling the shows. That was obviously disappointing. Who wants their shows to be cancelled? Nobody. I mean, you've been through the MSNBC
I've been there, yeah.
Machine. You would have to ask MSNBC why they did what they did. People have speculated. People have come up with their reasoning. I did my coverage the way I wanted to do my coverage, and even pre-October 7th. A lot of people just woke up to Palestine on October 7th. I was covering it for MSNBC for 3.5 years. I covered in 2021 when Biden became president. You remember there was it 11-day bombing campaign of Gaza by Netanyahu then? I grilled an Israeli embassy spokesman at the time, which went viral for MSNBC, and no one had any issues, and it was a very well-received interview. I covered Shireen Abu Akleh's killing. I did segments on apartheid and the A word, which my colleague Ali Velshi, who is still at MSNBC,
and he does a good job too.
Was I think the first person on cable to really talk about the A word in the context of Israel-Palestine. So I did all of that, and all I can say is I never censored myself. I said what I had to do. I interviewed the people I wanted. One of my last interviews was Mark Regev, the Netanyahu spokesman.
Yep.
why did MSNBC cancel my shows? You'd have to ask MSNBC.
So there was reporting very soon after October 7th about how you and Ali Velshi and Ayman Moyaldeen your roles were being diminished as part of the coverage of, October 7th and then Israel's assault on Gaza. I mean, did you feel pressure being applied to you? You may not have succumbed to that pressure. I think that's clear from your work product. But was there pressure applied to you? I remember watching the ADL dude going on Morning Joe and saying, oh, is it Hamas that's writing these scripts, these terrorist talking points? Did you feel that while you were there?
So when I was there, as I say, all news organizations had multiple discussions about how to cover this. It was a rolling story. It was a shocking story. Obviously, I'm bound by what I can talk about.
Sure.
As a former employee and in terms of sharing. And I'm also, just in my nature, I'm not someone who throws former colleagues under the bus. I've had my differences with many people at The Intercept. Some have come out in the open. I've tried to keep most behind closed doors. There were things I didn't agree with at Al Jazeera English. But I hate these people who kind of, and I'm not going to name names, but people who kind of just gratuitously throw people on the bus. Look, conversations were had, lots of conversations were had about editorial directions, about tone, about coverage. That's to be expected in every place. All I can say, and I can only speak for myself, is that I said what I had to say, I did what I had to do, and I asked the questions I wanted to ask. That's how I left MSNBC, and that's what I will always do. And anyone who knows me knows that's how I operate.
Crystal, you've talked about some instances you faced when you were at MSNBC about how you gave a monologue basically saying, please, Hillary, don't run. I don't remember what year this was.
2014?
2014, you did that. And then, you thought nothing of it. You did it. And then afterwards, higher-ups came to you and were basically like, if you're going to do a monologue on Hillary Clinton again, you have to run it by.
Yeah, it wasn't you can't do it. It's that the literal president of the network has to approve any future commentary about Hillary Clinton because, basically what I was told is that a call came in from the Hillary camp. They're very upset about this monologue and they were, oh, you're going to be unfair to us and we're not going to give you access effectively. And so that was one where the edict literally did sort of come down from the top. And, you said, and I believe you because I saw your coverage, that whatever conversations were had didn't impact you saying and covering the conflict the way that you felt appropriate. For myself, I can't rule out that thought of that
subconsciously
scrutiny.
Got to you.
Subconsciously,
yes, right.
yeah. You can't, you're a human being,
so let's
right?
let's take a step back then. Let's take a step back to the big picture.
Yeah.
Big picture, I've worked at the BBC, Sky News, and ITV News in the UK behind the scenes as a producer, sometimes very senior producer. I worked at Al Jazeera. I went to Al Jazeera English. I worked at The Intercept, and I went to NBC News in front of the camera as an on-screen personality. In all of those places, there were pressures. There were corporate pressures, financial pressures, ideological pressures. Anyone who claims, and we're going to get into kind of Noam Chomsky territory, that you can just ignore all that stuff. Of course not. Of course that applies. I've never claimed that there's not a trade-off.
Right.
For those of us who are on the left working within mainstream media, the issue is, where is that trade-off? Where is the line, and is it worth it?
Right.
And I remember when I did my book, when I released Win Every Argument last year, I went on a book tour, and I'm going to do a shameless plug. It's out this week in paperback.
I want to talk about that a little bit. Yeah.
When I did the book tour for that last year, we did an event at Politics and Prose, and you can watch it on YouTube with my former colleague Jen Psaki. And somebody in the audience said to me, came up to the mic, we did a Q&A, and he said, young kid, and I feel so bad because I was very aggressive in my response. Turns out he was a fan and he was just expressing himself, not in the best way. I got defensive, and when I get defensive, I get aggressive. Bad habit. He said to me, I've been following you for years, and you called out Saudi Arabia, and you called out Israel, and you called out America, and now you work in corporate media.
You still do those things. Yeah.
And can you point to me where I haven't been calling out Saudi Arabia, Israel, or American foreign policy? And he goes, you have. Okay, fair enough. and afterwards said that he was actually a fan. He wasn't criticizing me. He just
wanted to raise the point.
He wanted to raise the point. But my point being, there's a balancing act. And I know there are some purists, I'm sure some listeners of this show will say, no one should ever have anything to do with mainstream media. They're beyond. I don't agree with that.
I don't agree with that either.
I'm not of the view that we should have no voices in corporate media or mainstream media, and nor am I of the view that everyone who works in those places is a sellout or has had to sell their soul. I would argue that me and a bunch of other people, I'm not going to take their names and embarrass them, have actually managed to do a great job in mainstream media in terms of staying true to their principles, in terms of giving a voice to the voiceless, in terms of being truthful, in terms of giving historical and political context. I mean, for me, I will take this to my grave. You know the highlight from what? No, there's many highlights. One of the big highlights of me working at MSNBC for 3.5 years as a British American brown Muslim lefty immigrant from Al Jazeera and The Intercept turns up at NBC Universal. I get an email one day from Noam Chomsky, who says, and I quote, and we all wish Noam the best of health right now. He says, "In 25 years, I've never been invited on MSNBC. You're the first person to ever invite me on MSNBC."
Wow.
In fact, I got him on twice.
Wow.
So for me, I'm like, yeah, I didn't need to do that. I'm not trying to brag. It's not a brag or a humble brag or whatever it is. It's just a factual statement. I didn't need to get Noam Chomsky on, but I got him on. I didn't need to get certain voices on, and I believe that was of value. And I know that's of value because when I left, a lot of people reached out to me and said, "You were the person getting these voices on."
Yeah.
So I do believe there should be people working in those spaces.
So I'm going to ask you. I know you said you're not going to brag. I'm going to ask you to brag now, though,
Right.
because
I didn't say I don't love bragging. I just wasn't bragging at the time. Happy to brag now.
My reading of the situation as an outsider is that I think if you were given a prime time show at the 8 o'clock slot or whatever, you could have easily been the face of the network, and I think you could have definitely surpassed Chris Hayes' numbers. No offense to Chris Hayes. Maddow's numbers. No offense to Rachel Maddow. But like you're tailor-made for that position, but you weren't given that position. And so do you view that the same as I view that? That it's almost like there are points deducted because you're so outspoken, because you're on the left.
So, again, these are difficult conversations for me to have for obvious reasons, but I would say this, just state the stuff that's on the public record. I did guest host many of those shows that you mentioned. To be fair to MSNBC, they gave me a lot of opportunities. At certain times, I'd be like, what am I doing here? Why am I at 9 o'clock presenting live on MSNBC when a year ago I was just this random dude that a few people read here and there? So they did give me opportunity. I sat in for Rachel Maddow. I sat in for Alex Wagner. I sat in for Chris Hayes. I sat in for Ali Velshi, and multiple other people, Lawrence O'Donnell. I did get those opportunities, and you feel like the kid who's been allowed to drive the parents' nice car. You're like, take it for a spin. Am I going to break it? And I got good numbers and got good guests, and so therefore it's hard to come up with a simple explanation for what happened, and that's why I don't offer one. I don't want to speculate, and I say each to their own. I can only tell you that I enjoyed my run there, and they cancelled their shows, which is their right to do. But on the other hand, they canceled my shows, but they also gave me great opportunities in primetime.
Yeah, well, I'll also...
Which they didn't need to do, right?
That's true, but I'll also say in response to the Cenk Uygur, he has his story from when he was over there, that he was on, I believe, the 6 o'clock time slot it was, and he had the best numbers that they ever had in that time slot, and then they pulled him into the office, whoever the president was at the time. They basically told him, like, we got to work on your tone. Our friends in Washington don't like your tone. And it's because he was going, at the time, he was going very aggressively against the Obama administration, I think, involving Egypt policy. And so that was his sort of like, here's the moment that.
Well, let me make a generic point about media in general, which is, again, going back to Chomsky and ideology and manufacturing consent and the rest. I mean, it's not always about numbers and money and profit, is it? That's the point. I mean, Tucker Carlson found this out at Fox.
Right.
The guy's the highest rated host. If you had told me the night before he was fired, Tucker Carlson's going to get fired. They can't fire Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
They can actually.
Yeah.
So,
well, especially because
not that I wept
you just made my
at
own
the
point
departure
for
of
me
Tucker
better than I made it for me.
Well, especially because just in terms of the business model, these are MSNBC is a tiny blip on the bottom line of a gigantic corporation.
This is only a little piece of the interview. You definitely want to see the whole thing. We talked to Mehdi about Amelia.
My phone, my wallet, passport.
Go, Jackie.
Thank you, Kareem. What is the administration's response to the 14 House Democrats who voted with Republicans the other day to denounce the, quote, open borders policies of the Biden administration?
What do you mean? What's our comments on what?
ooh, that's a bingo.
A response to 14 Democrats in the House believing that this president has open border policies.
Well, look, we've been very clear. We want to deal with what's going on at the border. That's why we're having these conversations, these negotiations in the Senate with Republicans and Democrats. The president understands that this is an issue that matters to the American people. And we feel like those conversations that are happening, those negotiations are headed in the right direction. And so the president understands. He put the border security, right? That's part of the supplemental. His request on funding for border security was part of that national security ask, that emergency ask. So we believe we need to do more. The president understands we need to do more. And we see Republicans and Democrats in Senate want to do more.
Is it still the position of the administration that the border is secure?
Our position is that we need to do more at the border. We have to do more at the border. That's why these negotiations are currently happening. That's our position.
And is it the position of the administration that the efforts to impeach Secretary Mayorkas are unconstitutional?
What we believe is that what House Republicans are doing is playing political games. That's what we believe. And they're not doing their jobs, the jobs that the American people want them to be doing. And let's not forget, they won't even let Secretary Mayorkas even testify. They want to impeach him, but they're not even allowing him to testify. And so it is shameful. That's what we believe.
Oh boy. Here we go.
It is shameful. And what we'd encourage these House Republicans to do, and this is something that we saw coming out of the midterms in 2022, American people want to see Republicans and Democrats working together to deliver for them, to address the issues that matter. That's what we would rather see.
On the constitutionality portion, though, I saw that there was a memo that came out that was touting this open letter from constitutional law professors making the argument that impeachment based on policy disagreements is unconstitutional. So is that the approach the administration is taking to
What
this?
letter are you speaking to?
There was an Ian Sams memo that went out, and it was included an open letter from a number of constitutional law professors who were arguing that impeaching a cabinet secretary on the basis of policy disagreements is forbidden in the Constitution.
Well, I'm going to let my colleague's letter stand for itself. I've been very clear on how we feel and what we think about these impeachment proceedings, and a proceeding that is not even allowing Secretary Mayorkas to testify.
I'm just trying to gather, though, because it came to us from the White House, obviously, that is this something that the administration is going to fight in court on a constitutional basis, that this is not something that could happen?
Yeah, and I will say I'm going to let my White House colleagues at the counsel's office respond to that.
A month ago today, when you were asked about whether the White House had any regrets about linking Ukraine aid with border funding, you said no, not at all. I wanted to know if that was still the case today. Does the White House have any regrets about this strategy?
No, not at all, because both of those things are important to the president. They are emergency requests. That's why he included it in the supplemental, and we believe all of it needs to move forward.
And then just very quickly on student loans, there has been some Republican criticism from people like Senator Bill Cassidy, Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, specifically saying that the president is pandering in this election year, trying to buy votes with these kinds of moves on student loans.
It's about to go back.
There have been other lawmakers who've echoed something similar, saying it's not fair for Americans who didn't go to college to have to pay for those who racked up too much debt. What is the White House response to that?
No, we've heard that rhetoric many times before. That's nothing new, what you laid out to me. Look, the president made a promise that he would do everything that he can to take action to give American families a little bit of a breathing room, and that's related to student debt as well. And you heard at the top when I laid out that folks should not have to be crushed by student debt to be able to start a family, to be able to buy a home, right? And so this is what we've seen over the past several decades, and the president has been very clear. He's going to do everything that he can to give people a little bit more breathing room, to give people, make sure he lower cost for folks. And that's what we're seeing, right? We're seeing that from an array of folks just across the spectrum. And so I've heard those comments. That is not something that the president believes. The president believes that is important. You got to remember, this is a president who grew up in a middle-class family, who knows what it's like to sit around a kitchen table and try to figure out which bill are you going to pay. Are you going to pay that medical bill? Are you going to be able to pay that medical bill? Are you going to be able to put food on the table? Are you going to be able to pay the tuition for your kid that's going to college? And these are difficult conversations that American families have every month. And so if the president could do something to give families a little bit of dignity, a little bit of an opportunity to really be part of a growing economy, be part of the middle class, he's going to take that action. Okay?
What a load of crap!
Sabrina.
Thanks, Queen. When the president was asked yesterday about Arab Americans not wanting to vote for him over Gaza, his response was to point to former President Trump's travel ban on Muslim-majority nations. Putting aside for a moment that most Arab Americans are Christian, is that the bar here that his predecessor and likely opponent wants to ban Muslims and President Biden doesn't? And how does that relate to the substance of their criticism of Gaza?
That's a good question.
So look, I want to be really careful because there's a mix of upcoming election in your question in 2024. Look, I would look at, and I really want to be mindful here and careful. I think what the president was doing was trying to give a reminder of what we were before, right? What it looked like before in the last 4 years in the last administration. You have a president that has been very clear in protecting Arab Americans or any communities that are under attack, any communities that have felt left behind. And so I think his record and what he's been trying to do for folks here in this country, all communities, including the Arab American community, is very, very clear.
No.
And so I think it was a question that he was asked. He answered it very quickly. It probably, he thought of it as obviously asked in a political way. And so that's where he went. But I just also want to be super careful because this is an upcoming election.
Away from the campaign then, since the conflict began, the president has sat down with Muslim leaders only once that we know of on October 26th. And there was only one Palestinian American who was present for that meeting. Why has the president not met or engaged more directly with Palestinian American leaders in the more than 3 months since this conflict began?
Well, as you just stated in the top of your question, he has had direct conversation with leaders in the respective communities. His team has stayed in touch with members and leaders of those respective communities that you just laid out, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans as well. And so those conversations are obviously very important. I don't have anything to read out or lay out of any upcoming discussions with those leaders in those communities. But he's had direct conversation.
We want to make sure that your money is well spent and that you're really getting good value for the money you're putting into.
Okay, Jackie.
Thank you, Kareem. What is the administration's response to the 14 House Democrats who voted with Republicans the other day to denounce the, quote, open borders policies of the Biden administration?
What do you mean? What's our comments on what?
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Response to 14 Democrats in the House believing that the president has open border policies.
Look, we've been very clear. We want to deal with what's going on at the border. That's why we're having these conversations, these negotiations in the Senate with Republicans and Democrats. The president understands that this is an issue that matters to the American people. And we feel like those conversations that are happening, those negotiations are headed in the right direction. And so the president understands. He put the border security, right? That's part of the supplemental. His request on funding for border security was part of that national security ask, that emergency ask. So we believe we need to do more. The president understands we need to do more. And we see Republicans and Democrats in Senate want to do more.
Is it still the position of the administration that the border is secure?
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, the official death toll has topped 30,200 as Israeli forces continue their deadly attacks, one day after Israeli soldiers fired on people waiting for aid in northern Gaza, killing at least 104 people. harrowing survivor accounts have emerged in the wake of the massacre.
We went to get food and flour, and they started shooting at us. Then we threw ourselves into the streets, and no one looked for us. Eventually, people brought us here. There are martyrs lying around, and no one is looking for them.
If aid is to come to us in this way, we do not want it. We do not want to live on the blood of our children. If our children will die and be harmed in exchange for aid, we do not want aid.
Gaza's health ministry announced today at least another 4 children have died of starvation and dehydration in northern Gaza. On Capitol Hill, California Congressmember Rouhana grilled Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin over ongoing U.S. support for Israel in light of Thursday's massacre of Gazans waiting for food aid.
If Israel again ever stops American-paid aid from getting into Gaza, will you commit to not sending future arms cells?
Again, that's not my decision.
We need some consequences when another country is defying you, defying the National Security Advisor, defying the President, defying National Security Memorandum 20. There has to be some consequence.
Secretary Austin refused to say the U.S. would ever hold Israel accountable for killing Palestinians and violating international law. During questioning, Austin also said over 25,000 Palestinian women and children have been killed by Israel since October 7th. Though that figure is likely close to the true death toll, the Pentagon was later forced to walk back Austin's statement, claiming he was referring to the total death toll, not just women and children. In labor news, Washington State's largest union, United Food and Commercial Workers, endorsed a primary vote for uncommitted rather than President Biden in the March 12th primary, citing a need to, quote, end U.S. funding toward this reckless war, unquote. Yemen's Houthi movement warned it's planning surprise military operations in the Red Sea against Israeli, U.S., and other targets over the assault on Gaza. Meanwhile, Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati said a ceasefire in Gaza would trigger negotiations to halt fighting between Hezbollah and Israeli forces.
We are saying, God willing, if we are able to reach a cessation of military activities in Gaza, then I believe that we will have ahead of us weeks packed with negotiations so that we can reach what I have always called long-term stability in the south of Lebanon.
In New Jersey, residents of Teaneck say they'll organize public protests if the Keter Torah synagogue goes ahead with a plan to host a March 10th real estate event selling housing units in illegal West Bank settlements. This is local activist Rich Siegel.
If we allow this sale to go through, we are enabling a local synagogue to violate both domestic anti-discrimination laws and international law. Now, there's other reasons we shouldn't allow it, okay? There's a genocide going on right now.
In Texas, President Biden and former President Trump traveled to the U.S.-Mexico border Thursday in competing trips to tout ever harsher immigration policies. Trump visited Eagle Pass with Republican Texas Governor Greg Abbott, while Biden spoke from Brownsville, where he appealed to Trump to work together to lobby Congress on a border deal.
Here's what I would say to Mr. Trump. Instead of playing politics with this issue, instead of telling members of Congress to block this legislation, join me, or I'll join you, in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill. We can do it together. You know and I know. It's the toughest, most efficient, most effective border security bill this country has ever seen.
Their visit came on the same day a federal judge temporarily blocked a sweeping new Texas law that would have allowed police to arrest anyone suspected of entering the United States without authorization. SB 4 had been set to go into effect next week. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights held a special hearing Thursday on climate change-fueled displacement. It's part of an effort to have the organization formally recognize forced migration due to the climate crisis and establish legal protections for climate refugees and internally displaced people. Eugenio Belto Ramirez from Honduras is a survivor of last year's deadly fire at a migrant jail in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, which killed 43 people. He was trying to make his way to the U.S. after he lost his livelihood when the shrimp farm where he worked was destroyed due to rising sea levels. This is part of his testimony, voiced over by an interpreter.
And let us not be looked at askance saying, oh God, here come some more immigrants. Block the border. We have human rights. We simply are hoping for the chance of a better life. That's all we want. And I can only hope, pray God, that the governments would get together and understand the situation and somehow find some decent, some humane way to address the problem.
In the Texas Panhandle, at least 2 people have been killed as the Smokehouse Creek fire continues to rage. On Thursday, it merged with another wildfire, becoming the largest ever fire in Texas history and the second largest in U.S. history as it spreads into Oklahoma. The flames have engulfed over 1 million acres, razing entire neighborhoods to the ground. It's just 5% contained. The climate crisis is making wildfires more frequent and more devastating. Greenpeace said, quote, as the largest oil driller and producer in the United States, oil companies in Texas are literally fueling the flames on their doorstep. In Pakistan, the National Assembly swore in newly elected members of parliament Thursday amidst protests by lawmakers from the party of ousted and jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Khan's supporters got up and shouted, vote thief, as Shehbaz Sharif entered the chamber with his brother Nawaz Sharif. Both men are also former prime ministers. Shehbaz Sharif is expected to form a new government after none of the major parties won a majority of parliamentary seats in February's election. Supporters of Imran Khan have accused the military of election tampering. Here in the United States, over 30 Congress members sent an open letter to President Biden asking him to withhold U.S. recognition of the new Pakistani government until a, quote, thorough, transparent, and credible investigation of election interference has been conducted. In Iran, polls have opened in the first election since an anti-government uprising rocked the country in 2022 following the death of Mahsa Amini while in police custody. Voters are casting ballots for 290 parliamentary seats and 88 seats on the Assembly of Experts, which appoints the supreme leader of Iran. But turnout is expected to be low amidst calls for a boycott and voter disenfranchisement. Jack Teixeira, a member of the Massachusetts Air National Guard, is expected to change his plea to guilty to charges of leaking a series of highly classified Pentagon intelligence documents to a group of gamers on the messaging app Discord. He was indicted last year under the Espionage Act and has been jailed since April 2023. The 22-year-old is scheduled for a Monday hearing in Boston to change his plea. In media news, The Intercept, Raw Story, and Alternet have sued OpenAI and Microsoft, accusing their generative artificial intelligence products of copyright violations. The outlets say their copyrighted content was plagiarized and used to develop and operate the popular AI tool ChatGPT. Raw Story and Alternet CEO John Byrne said in a statement, quote, it's important to democracy that a diverse array of news sites continue to thrive. OpenAI's violations, if not checked, will further decimate the news industry and with it the critical news reporters who affect positive change, unquote. In Ghana, rights groups are sounding the alarm as lawmakers passed a new bill targeting LGBTQ+ communities. It includes prison sentences of up to 3 years for anyone convicted of identifying as LGBTQ+, up to 10 years for advocacy campaigns aimed at children, and a maximum 5-year sentence for establishing or funding an LGBTQ+ group. Same-sex intercourse is already banned in Ghana. President Nana Akufo-Addo has said he would sign the measure into law if the majority of the population supports it. And in Moscow, Thousands of mourners have gathered outside a church for Alexei Navalny's funeral amidst heavy police presence. But mourners say it was important for them to be there.
I could not come because I think that I have to give my last respect to this man.
Were you afraid?
We were very afraid. We arrived early and were standing here for a long time, hiding our flowers and cameras. But now I realize that we need to do this and speak up.
Hundreds of people have been arrested for publicly mourning Navalny in the 2 weeks since his death in an Arctic prison. The U.S., rights groups, and others have blamed President Putin directly for Navalny's death. Among those spotted at the funeral were recently Kremlin disqualified anti-war Russian presidential candidate Boris Nadezhdin and prominent Putin critic, former mayor of Yekaterinburg, Yevgeny Roizman, as well as U.S., French, and German.
Divine Marie.
Say my ancestors don't play about me. I am who? I am me.
They really want to try to stop me. Remember, I can't be stopped. Flow like the wind. Slow like the wind. Breathe out, breathe in.
Stop projecting. It has nothing to do with me, it's you. When you begin to realize that most people are projecting, you won't take anything personal. We all been through some shit, but it's time to heal. Release. Let go.
Heal.
Releasing shame. Releasing doubt. Activating our crown. We are connected with the moon and the stars. Us women are. We are. Twisted dark fantasy.
No commitment.
In store for today.
Thank you, Kareem. Would President Biden ever try to get out of a meeting by pulling a fire alarm?
Are you talking about something specifically?
A Democratic member of Congress pulled a fire alarm around a series of votes. No fire. Is that appropriate?
What I can tell you is I've not spoken to the president about this. And so just not going to comment. I would leave it up to, I know there's a House process moving forward right now. I'll leave it to the House.
Okay. Since President Biden is so pro-union, is he okay with 75,000 healthcare workers possibly walking off the job this week?
What I can tell you is that, and I've said this many times already this morning, the president believes all workers, including healthcare workers and those that make their work possible, they deserve a fair pay, and they deserve a fair benefit. That's what the president believes. He believes that collective bargaining works. That is, we've seen that play out in the past, even couple of months. We think about the Teamsters. You think about the Teamsters and the UPS. You think about the West Coast ports. Right, we see that play out, and so it is important that we see that continue. And I'll have to say, like the Treasury Department laid out recently a major report that unions and collective bargaining are good for the overall economy. Oh, right. And help raise wages for everybody, whether they are a union member or not. And I think that matters.
Would you consider joining them on the picket line if they strike?
Look, I don't have anything else to share on the president's schedule. What I can say is that when we see this type of collective bargaining, when we see this type of, the report that I just laid out, when unions and unions do collective bargaining, it actually helps our economy overall, and it raises wages, and I think that's important for all, not just union members, also non-union members.
And a couple days ago, looters were terrorizing businesses in Philadelphia. What is the White House doing about that?
That's a good question.
So obviously, any coordinated theft and vandalism that occurred in Philadelphia is destructive and simply unacceptable. That's what we say. We've always said that. Any type of vandalism, any type of violence, we certainly denounce that from here. The acts of these individuals harmed local businesses, as we saw in the communities that depend on them. But I also want to be clear, because the police commissioner in Philadelphia did say, and he said this on the record, that looting was the act of opportunists taking advantage of an unrelated protest. But obviously, and we have been very consistent here when it comes to any sort of vandalism, certainly looting or any type of violence. We are going to simply condemn that, and it is unacceptable.
That's what she said.
Question on Ukraine funding. Are you able to outline for us how much the U.S. has left in funding for Ukraine, both military and humanitarian, until a new funding bill was approved? So
any specific questions on the funding that is left, I would have to refer you to the Department of Defense. They'll be more able to share what is the presidential drawdown authorities, what's left there. But look, it is enough for us to meet Ukraine's urgent battlefield needs for a bit longer, but we'll be maintaining our steady cadence of PDAs for sure. But it is not the long-term solution here. It is not the long-term solution.
Don't nobody understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, man.
Confirm that the president is planning to call allies, that funding for Ukraine will continue?
I don't have any calls to preview for you at this time with allies or partners.
Thank you, Kareem. Congress was not able to pass the 12 bills to fund the government in the last 4 months since the president reached the broad spending deal with them on June 2nd. What gives the White House confidence that they'll be able to do that in the next 45 days?
Because this is their basic duty is to keep the government open. We shouldn't have to wait 45 days. House Republicans should not have to wait 45 days to do their jobs. And one of the things that Speaker McCarthy learned is, that you have to do your job, right? Which is why I think he moved forward.
Oh, really?
And so, look, this is something that Congress is their duty to do, is to keep the government open, to make sure that federal government employees get paid, to make sure these critical, important programs are continue to be paid in, so that families across the country, American families across the country, are getting those critical programs. And so this is their basic duty.
Government funding now goes through November 17th, which is right around the time that the president is expected to be in San Francisco for APEC. What discussions are happening about what impact that could have on the president's meeting with leaders of China and other countries?
I just don't have any, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals from here.
Oh, shit. Here we go again.
Or again, they don't have to wait 45 days to get this done. They really don't. There's no excuse for another crisis. That is what the president said yesterday. And they have to stop the games. They have to stop playing these games. That's, again, what the president said. They have to get to work and stop playing games and do their duty. Or else we're going to be in the same place that we were this weekend a month from now. And so, what they're doing instead is pursuing these 30% cuts. We're talking about education. We're talking about Meals on Wheels. We're talking about really critical programs that Americans need just to move through their day-to-day lives. And so we can't be focusing on that. They need to keep the government open, continuing to do that, their basic duty. Yeah, Danny. I'll come to you back in.
Thanks, Kareem. The Kremlin said this morning that Western fatigue over Ukraine is going to grow in the United States and other countries after what happened here in Washington this weekend. I mean, how do you respond to that, and what can the United States do to prevent it?
So here's our message to Putin. The president has built a coalition of more than 50 countries, right? He provided aid to support Ukraine. That is what the president has done. And we have rallied more than 140 countries to condemn Russia's invasion into Ukraine. That's what the president has been able to do. There is very strong international coalition behind Ukraine. And if Putin thinks he can outlast us, he's wrong. he's wrong. And so we will have another package of aid for Ukraine soon to signal our continued support for the brave people of Ukraine. And so that's our message. If he thinks he can outlast us, that is Mr. Putin, we believe he's wrong.
Ooh, that's a bingo.
Corinne, following on that, the Financial Times reported Russia has successfully avoided Western sanctions on almost all oil exports by using Chinese yuan to avoid those sanctions. What confidence do you have that those sanctions, that this is continuing to work? And how can the White House continue the same path using sanctions to try and change Russia's behavior without enlisting China in some way?
We begin today's show in Texas, where the two leading presidential candidates visited the U.S.-Mexico border Thursday, as many voters say immigration continues to be a key issue.